if you're familiar with these names, and so it's going to be real simple. I'm going to mention a name, and you're going to put your hand up if you think this person is actually in the Bible or not. Okay? Are you with me? You're clear on this? Pretty straightforward? Okay. So, we'll start off what I think is pretty easy here. Paul. Okay. I see some of you are kind of like me in school, right? You see what other people do, and then you put your hand up, right? All right. Whatever works for you. Okay, so Paul, we're doing pretty good. Yes, Paul is in the Bible. Second one, Timothy. Smart group. Maybe I don't need to be up here at all on Sunday mornings here. All right, we're going to get a little bit tougher here. Epaphroditus. Can you put your hands up? How many of you think that I'm actually making that name up and that name doesn't even exist? Yeah, I love it how more hands go up for that than not. But we're actually going to hear a little bit more about Epaphroditus a little bit later on to see if he is actually someone in the Bible. But I'm going to ask you one more question. Because if you're just joining us, we've been doing a series called Mythbusters. And essentially, the whole premise of the series has been looking at different views that people have with regards to faith, with regards to Jesus, with regards to church. And we've been unpacking these views and seeing, are these really truth that we should hold on to, or are they myths that we should kind of let fall by the wayside? And so the statement I want to make, again, by a show of hands, if you agree with this statement, okay? So if you agree with this statement, raise your hand. Joel is the minister of Paris Presbyterian. Oh, if you're new, I'm Joel, by the way. Nice to meet you. That's kind of put everyone on even. So the question is, Joel is the minister of Paris Presbyterian Church. Anyone want to raise their hands? If I had a buzzer right now, I would buzz all of you, right? Wrong, gong, right? Bit of a trick question. The key word is the, right? You got to listen, people. You got to listen on Sunday morning here. But it's the reality of one of the myths is that people assume that Joel, or whatever name you want to insert, the reverend or the pastor, is the minister of the church. And we fall into this place of thinking ministry is that which is done by the so-called professionals, those people who are paid to engage. And oftentimes, one of the greatest challenges that a church faces in terms of getting involved in its community, in terms of truly carrying the gospel into this world, is we don't think we have a role to play. And so this morning, we're going to unpack that myth a little bit more to come to a better place of understanding that we are all ministers of this church. That we all have different gifts, we all have different abilities, we all have different ministries that are so vitally important to see the building up of God's kingdom. But to help us unpack this a little bit more, we're going to hear who exactly Epaphroditus truly is. His story comes from the book of Philippians, and Philippians is not so much a book as it is a letter that Paul is writing to the Christians in Philippi. It's towards the end of his ministry where he is now in home arrest. He is in prison in Rome. And he's writing this letter of encouragement because Paul is not only near the end of his life, but he is suffering, he is not well. And he's speaking about the reality of living out our faith even in the midst of suffering to encourage the Christians in Philippi. And he talks about this guy, Epaphroditus. And so who's just excited to hear more about Epaphroditus this morning? Well, too bad. You're hearing about him anyways. And Heather's going to share a little bit about him.
In Philippians chapter 2, verses 25 to 30, it speaks about this gentleman. Still, I think it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and co-worker and fellow soldier, your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for all of you and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. He was indeed so ill that he nearly died. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, in order that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. Welcome him then in the Lord with all joy, honor such people, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for those services that you could not give me. Finally, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord.
And so there's a very brief snapshot into the life of Epaphroditus. And I just love the language that Paul uses as he talks about being a fellow worker, another person who is engaged in ministry. And if you're like me, you've probably read through the book of Philippians perhaps before, and you focus on this great teaching that Paul gives about the reality of just who Jesus is and then what that means for us in the midst of all of life. But in chapter 2, it's like Paul stops his train of thought because he goes from this great teaching to talking about two guys, Timothy and Epaphroditus. And to be honest, up until this week, I've read through Philippians a number of times, and I know there was the mention of Timothy in there, but Epaphroditus, just like whoop, right out of there. I didn't even realize it. Had to go back over and over again. And because what's happening is what you see oftentimes are these little blips in Paul's writings. You see, Paul is one of the great early writers within the Christian church, and there's such great doctrine, and there's such great truth, and so much of what we believe and understand with regards to following Jesus comes from the teachings of Paul. But what Paul so often does in the majority of his writings is he inserts these seemingly random names into them. The book of Romans ends with about 16 verses of just name after name after name. And I don't think Paul is like name dropping famous people, right? Have you ever been around someone who always has to tell you all the other really cool people that they know? Paul isn't doing that because these people that Paul often mentions, Epaphroditus, is not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. We don't know about him in terms of history, and so there must be something significant going on. And I think it hits at this crucial point and this crucial understanding of ministry is that Paul, probably better than anyone else, realizes that we are in this together. That Paul recognizes that he could not be doing the specific ministry that God has placed upon him without the tremendous support of those around him. You see, so often we look at people like Paul and we look at people like Timothy or Peter, the other leaders in the church, and we think, wow, we spend so much time on them, but we can't miss the reality of so many other people that are engaged in ministry with him. That's why so often we see Paul when he's talking to others. He says to Timothy at one place, listen, do the work of an evangelist. Now, notice he doesn't say you are an evangelist. He says do the work of it. And what does an evangelist do? They tell other people about Jesus. And so Paul is saying everybody can be involved in that in a variety of ways. And so understand that we have a part to play. And so when Paul teaches in places like Corinthians or in places like Romans about these spiritual gifts and about how the body is made up of many parts, Paul isn't speaking from an ivory tower. He's talking from living life with other people and realizing that we need each other in order to build the church. You see, Epaphroditus was sent by the Christians in Philippi to essentially at first bring money to Paul. He was like the first Western Union of the day, right? You couldn't put it in a mail slot, so you gave it to a guy like Epaphroditus, and he took the money physically to Paul. Because they knew that Paul was in Rome and he was not doing well and he needed some money to support his ministry, and so Epaphroditus showed up. But then while he was there, he realized that, Paul wasn't doing so well. And so he hung around a while and ministered to Paul and helped him out along the way. And during that time, Epaphroditus got incredibly sick as well. Paul says he almost lost his life, but he remained faithful to ministry. I mean, why don't we hear more about this guy? Yeah, Paul did some great things, but Epaphroditus, he did some incredible things as well. I think that's why Paul so often brings these other names into play, so that we get the point and the reality of that the body of Christ is made up of many people. And we need everybody to see the ministry of God truly take place. And so I got thinking again this week, the same is true here at this church. There's so many people engaged in ministry. There's so many people engaged in different ways that if not for everybody coming together, we wouldn't have what we have. Just to illustrate that quickly, turn to your neighbor in a moment and tell them a number. And the number is going to be based on how many people do you think on a Sunday morning on average, are engaged in ministry. You have 3 seconds. Okay, time's up. Anyone get close to 50? Yeah? Person next to them, are they telling the truth? Right? Okay, around 50 people are engaged in ministry every Sunday morning. I mean, you see certain people up front, right? You see the people, the musicians, the singers. You see me up front, and you think, wow, that's great ministry. But if you think of all the people who provide ministry for our kids through the kids program, through the nursery, when you think of the people who welcome you at the doors, when you think of the people who put on the coffee and the cookies, when you think of the people praying before the service and after the service, when you think of the people who prepared the bulletins for you, like the list can go on and on and on. When you think of the people who run the sound desk, the sound, the camera, and the screens, right? So often, and we're getting better at this, right? There hasn't been much rubbernecking as of late. Oftentimes we get better at this because we don't realize how valuable ministries are until they're not there anymore. Right? And so often you suddenly see this void, but you realize there are so many people engaged in ministry together. Do you know this year marks the 177th year of ministry of this church? 177 years of ministry in this community. I mean, that's amazing. That's incredible. We would not be here today if not for the people before us being faithful to ministry in this community. This building has been around for 120 years. So for 120 years, there has been people engaged in ministry. There have been people standing where I'm standing, talking about Jesus. And that is just so cool. But there's one number I want to kind of have you remember here this morning. It's the number 25. And that number is important because 25 represents the number of years that Dave and Elaine have served as custodians in this church. 25 years. And let me tell you, if there isn't a behind-the-scenes ministry, this is it. When you show up on a Sunday morning and this place is clean and looks awesome, it's not because of me. When it's nice and warm in the winter or nice and cool in the summer, it's not because of me. When you see the sidewalks shoveled or the grass cut, it's because of Elaine and Dave for 25 years being involved in this ministry. And so today is a day that we're going to give thanks for them. And like, how do you say thank you for 25 years? Because Paul, in the letter about Epaphroditus, when he sends him back to the Philippians, he says, listen, honor them. Honor this guy. And I'm like, that's great, Paul, but could you tell me a little bit more as to how we can honor people in that way? And Paul doesn't, for whatever reason. And so I thought, okay, if Paul's not going to tell us, how can we as a Presbyterian church honor Elaine for 25 years? And so there's a couple of things. After the service, we're going to have some gifts to give to Dave and Elaine for us on behalf of the church. We want to celebrate them. And so take some time to come into the Rose Room and to just give thanks and to say thank you for Elaine. As Presbyterians, you can never honor someone if you don't have cake. So we're going to have cake. All right? So go in the back room, have some cake, give thanks to Elaine. And then we don't often do this, but where is Elaine? Is Elaine in here? Elaine, can you just stand up for a moment? Because I know, that's, yeah. Thank you. Like, we are in this together. And because of people like Elaine and Dave, because of the people who serve downstairs, because of the people who sing, because of the people who spend time in prayer, because of the people who go up every week to Telfer Place, because of the people who come and support the drop-in, because of the people who help at the community dinner, we are able to engage in ministry in this place. And so, as Paul rightfully understood, we need everyone to be a part of this. So don't believe the myth that Joel is the minister. We're all in ministry together. We all have specific gifts to carry out the work of God in this place. Someone often asks me, so Joel, what do you do as a pastor of the church? And I say, I do a number of different things, but I actually realize one of the most important things that I do is actually act as like a head cheerleader, right? Like a head cheerleader. And I'm learning more about cheering because Masika, our daughter, is in Ringette, and they love to cheer. They love to cheer. I'm not going to do one here this morning for you. Come out to her Ringette game, and I will maybe. But this is actually biblical because Paul talks about in the book of Ephesians about the importance of, again, specific ministries and how they all play out. So we're just going to pull it up on the screen here. It says, "And God appointed some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers." Notice he doesn't say everyone to be an evangelist, everyone to be a pastor, but this is the kicker right here. To prepare people, let's go back one slide. To prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. One of my roles is when you gather here on a Sunday morning is to encourage you, is to equip you, is to teach you so that you then don't just leave the building and think, wow, that was either a great or not so great message this morning. That's okay, Joel gets another shot at it next week. No, that's not the conversation. The conversation is, okay, I've been in here, now I'm going out into my community, into my family, into my workplace. How is God going to use me in wherever He puts me? That's why our motto or our vision or our slogan, whatever you want to attack on that as a church, is we are a community that gathers in order to scatter. That we are a part of ministry in the midst of everything. Paul says this in Colossians 3. He says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord." And so when I come and I share with you on Sunday mornings, I want to give it with all my heart. Because I'm not only simply talking with you, but I'm representing God in the midst of this. In the same way that as you go out from here and you go back into your families, you go back into your communities, you go back into your places of work, there are ministry opportunities for you to be involved in. And so for us to get beyond this myth, we have to begin to see ourselves as ministers of this church. And so to kind of help us get over that hurdle, because sometimes we may be there and we think, well, there's different issues, there's different views. So let me knock down 3 other myths that are kind of linked together with this one. The first one is that ministry only happens in the church building. A lot of times we think, okay, we got to get people to church because that's where the good stuff happens. And absolutely, there's a part to play in terms of bringing people to church so that they can be a part of the body of Christ and we can learn and we can encourage together. But ministry doesn't only happen in this church. If this church were, heaven forbid, after 120 years, something was to happen to it, ministry wouldn't cease to exist. We still have the people, we still have the body of Christ. And so how are we engaged in ministry? And I would argue that some of the greatest ministries taking place are not happening in these four walls. It's an odd-shaped building. I'm not sure if it's exactly four walls, but you get my point, right? And that's the reality of just how we get involved in our community, how we get involved in terms of ministry in just incredible ways. And so we need to get beyond that. We have to learn to break the holy huddle, right? We spend so much time huddling together and learning about Jesus that we never actually say break and we go. And we kind of run the plays. That's why as a church we're running fewer and fewer programs, because you hear me say this over and over again. The church is not here to make your life busier, but to learn how we can engage in ministry wherever we are. Another myth that often happens is that some ministries are more important. And this is a personal pet peeve of mine. The idea that, well, there are gifts, there are real special gifts, but there are specific gifts, there are specific ministries, and one of the dangers we fall into is we think that some ministries are far more important. What is Paul always talking about? The idea that we're in this together. And oftentimes the way that this kind of perpetuates itself is when people go overseas. We think, wow, that is ministry. But what I'm doing over here, it's not really the same. I can say this because we've lived overseas for 3 years. We're going back for a year. But that is no more special than what's happening here. One of the greatest struggles for Rebecca and I as we were kind of discerning God's will to go back overseas is that we really don't want to leave the ministries behind here in Paris because there's just some incredible things happening. And it is a myth, it is false, it is wrong to think that if you go overseas, that is more important than ministry here. And so we send teams to Nicaragua, as we are again this coming summer, not because it's more important, but because it's a specific ministry. It's a specific way that we can partner with another community and engage in ministry, but by no means is it more important. And as we're away in Malawi for a year and engaged in ministry there, we want to stay connected with you guys, and hopefully you'll stay connected with us. But by no means is it more important in terms of what we're doing as what's happening right here. And then the third myth is sometimes people think, well, what can I do? Right? What could I possibly do based on age, based on circumstance, just based on being uncertain? What can I do? And to help me kind of flesh this out a little bit, we're just going to watch a real quick video.
Oh, help. Can you help me, please? I'm stuck.
I don't think that's a good idea. I have zero experience in lumberjacking.
Thank God you're here. Can you make some food? I've been stuck here for 6 days and all I've had to eat are 2 pine cones.
Well, I'm not a nutritionist, so I wouldn't know what someone in your condition would.
Do something!
Do what? I'm not a zoologist.
There's a gun in the tent. Get the gun.
I don't have a license. I've never operated.
Look, just throw a rock or something.
I'm not a geologist. I don't know which one would be most effective.
Oh, I don't want to die. I don't even know if I'll get to heaven. Do you at least know how to get to heaven?
Well, actually, I'm a Christian, but I'm not a theologian, so I wouldn't really know what to say to you. But if you ever get out of here, you really should look into it.
Oh, he's coming! Run!
But I have no formal training in long distance running.
There's not much more to say. A lot of the times we just come up with excuses and we think, well, I don't have the training, or I'm not an expert, or I can't do this. And so often what we see in ministry is God just encouraging us to take the first step. I'm sure we've all heard the saying, you got to crawl before you walk. You got to walk before you run. It starts with the principle of the first step. Think of any ministry in this church, in this world, any ministry organization, and you cannot tell me that it didn't begin with a first step of someone feeling led by God to do a specific thing. You see little kids walk, right? When they're in that crawling stage and they're about to kind of get up and they're going to take their first step. Is that the best step they're ever going to take? No. There's a little bit of exhilaration. You're excited, but you're also a little fearful because you're like, this could go sideways quickly. And I think sometimes that's what happens in ministry, right? We take that first step and it's somewhat exhilarating, but also fearful because this could go sideways. But what I learned so much is oftentimes the greatest ministries in my life have happened not in my initial success, but in my initial failures. Because then you realize, okay, maybe that's not the direction I need to go. And step by step, God continues to lead us and to direct us. Do you know this past week, you wonder some of the other things I do besides cheerleading. I went into a pharmacy and I bought $1,200 worth of Results. Anyone remember what Results is? That's the hair shampoo for lice. $1,200. You know the look you get when you buy $1,200 worth? Yeah, laughter. That about sums it up. But it's amazing. You know this congregation? We've raised over $1,500 to buy product to help support local schools. Do you know this past week we got a couple of phone calls from parents in the community? We got calls from schools saying, we need your help. We hear you're a church that wants to help. And I get to show up and give like a brief tutorial, because it is a step-by-step process on head lice. And they are so grateful and they are so thankful. I got to share with the pharmacists up at Northville Pharmacy, and they thought it was such a great ministry without even asking. They say, we're going to knock off 15%. 15%. So buy your toothpaste up there, you know? and say thank you. But do you know how that ministry started? It started a year ago when we started the drop-in. And that then led to the backpacks. And then that led to the head lice. And that's going to lead to, I have no idea. But if we never took the first step, guess what? I would not be in Northville Pharmacy last Tuesday buying head lice. If you asked me a year ago, what would I be doing? I would not have given you that answer. And the same is true with everything that we do. You know, the really interesting thing about Epaphroditus is his was a step-by-step ministry as well. He started by taking money to Paul. That was the first step, big step, important step. Then when he was there, he realized Paul needed some help and needed some assistance. So Epaphroditus assisted Paul. And then Epaphroditus was then sent home to go back to Philippi, but biblical scholars believe that Paul gave him something for his return journey. The book of Philippians, the letter of Philippians. So I believe you could argue that because of people like Epaphroditus, we have the words of Paul here today. Do you think Epaphroditus woke up one morning and thought, okay, God, what incredible ways are you going to use me? I think sometimes God drops incredible things into our path, but I think more often God encourages us to take that first step. You know, we can spend so much time wondering, God, what is your will for me in my life? And we can spend so much time that God is just saying, please just get off your couch, Joel, and help somebody, serve somebody, pray for somebody, and watch the doors begin to open up. We're probably not going to have the same notoriety. We're not going to be as well known as guys like Paul. But we can all be like an Epaphroditus. And he is just as important. As a church, we are a community that gathers in order to scatter. And so I'm not going to ask you about the gathering part because you're here this morning. But I want to challenge you with the scattering. What ministry, what first step is God asking you to take with your family, within this church, within your workplace, within your community. I have no idea what it is going to be, and that excites me. And I hope it excites you as well. Because Joel is not the minister of this church. He is a minister with specific gifts, specific abilities. But thank God I have all of you, because if it was just up to me, we'd barely get up off the ground. And so we need to come around each other and understand that we are in this together. And when we take those first steps, incredible things begin to happen. Please stand as we sing together.
Take these hands, I know they're empty, but with you I can be used for beauty in your perfect plan. All I am is yours. Take these feet, I know they stumble, but you use the weak. You use the humble, so please use me. All I am is yours. I give you all my life, I'm letting it go. A living sacrifice, no longer my own. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. Take this heart, set it on fire, shining in the dark. I want to tell the world of who you are. All I am is yours. I give you all my life, I'm letting it go. A living sacrifice, no longer my own. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. I give you everything. To you I belong. Every beat of my heart, the breath in my lungs. All I am is yours. All I am is yours.